Hey guys, this is Brian. I'm the host of Slow Down to Speed Up, and today we have a special solo episode featuring moi. So today I wanted to spend a few minutes just talking a little bit about how the podcast has gone now that it's been running for a few months and we're about a little over a dozen episodes in. And before I do that, I actually want to make a quick announcement, which is I'm going to take a short pause on releasing new episodes after this one for probably 2 or 3 months. My plan is to start resuming publishing episodes around August or September. The reason for that being I've got a lot of things going on this summer with work, with family, with my own personal growth work that to prioritize the podcast right now would be a little bit tricky. The second reason for that is, and I'll get into this in more detail, is that I've actually run out of guests to coach and to work with on the podcast. And so that obviously makes it hard for me to publish new episodes. And I'll talk a little bit about, kind of how I came to this situation and what I'm going to do about it. But high level, what I'm doing in today's episode is really just doing a few things. One, talking a little bit about the origins of the podcast itself, giving you a little bit of a behind the scenes look into how I came up with the idea, the name, what was my intention behind it, what were my expectations, and so on and so forth. And then to talk about how it's gone. So, how have the last few months been for me? What have I learned? What's been a surprise? What's not been a surprise? How have I been experiencing it? And so on and so forth. And then I also want to then talk about what am I doing next? So as I think about the next iteration of the podcast, what were some of the lessons learned that I want to carry forward? And what were some of the experiments that I want to run to see if I can improve things, make it better, and just overall make it more enjoyable for the people that come on and for myself. So let's just start by talking about how did the podcast come to be? It was about this time last year, summer of 2023, where I was going through some turmoil with my business. I had lost a number of clients over the first half of 2023. The market in startups was definitely very pessimistic. Funding was becoming really hard to raise, a lot of budget cuts. And as a result, I had a number of founders say, hey, I can't work with you anymore because of budget and other reasons. And so I remember finding myself really, like many of my clients, deep in this fear, scarcity place of like, oh my God, like what's going to happen with my business? How do I make sure that it goes in the right direction? And so I remember I was catching up with a former client of mine and who actually, she came on the podcast not too long ago, Lauren Tracy, and just catching up with her. And she has a background in media. And I was talking about what was going on my end and how I was thinking about really just building and growing the business. And the idea of putting out video content just naturally came about in the conversation. And one thing led to another. And I think Lauren sort of incepted this idea to me, which was, what if people actually had a chance to see what it was like for Brian to coach people in real time? The idea just was so crazy to me, right off the bat, that I was excited about it. I'm a big podcast fan. I listen to a lot of different podcasts and, the stuff that you might expect of me: startups, leadership, entrepreneurship, coaching, personal development. And one of the things that I noticed about a lot of, at least the startup space in terms of podcast content, was that there was a lot of founder stories and, hey, here's how I built this thing. Here's how I took it from 0 to 1, 1 to 10. 10 to 100. Here are the lessons I learned. Here are some of the hard challenges. Here are the things, the anecdotes that I might want to share with the audience. But very, 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 very rare to actually witness leaders and founders working through real life issues and watching their process, watching their, intellectual, emotional sort of faculties come online as they were grappling with something quite alive at the moment. And, in the coaching world, yeah, there are podcasts out there where sometimes there will be like actual recorded sessions. And I've always been interested in seeing how other coaches work with clients and also how other clients experience coaching and what they experience in that container. And so when Lauren kind of gave me this idea, I was like, yeah, I want more of that. It kind of was this idea of like, build the thing that you want to see more of. And this became something that I just couldn't let go of. It was an idea that really excited me. And the name, let's talk about the name of Slow Down to Speed Up. This comes from, I believe it comes from the Navy SEAL. It's like this phrase of slow is smooth and smooth is fast. So I kind of adapted that idea to slow down to speed up, because founders, entrepreneurs, leaders, they're all interested in moving really, really quickly and making progress as fast as they can. And I totally understand that impulse. I share that same impulse. But I also know that when we're in a rush, it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to get frazzled and anxious. And then you're liable to make mistakes and a lot of errors and then getting yourself into a bad spot. And so coaching is one of many different practices that to me encourages that slowing down, that space where I can find ground, find center, and really examine myself and my situation and see, hey, how is it that I'm currently creating my current conditions? And how do I start to shift something, whether it's in my thinking, it's in my feeling, it's in my belief systems, in my behaviors and actions and all that, that they can start to influence the system in a way that moves it towards what I want. And so slow down to speed up really seemed to capture that idea. If I slow down sufficiently to really see and know myself, then I have some more agency, some more choice, and some more empowerment. And so that's really been the spirit of what I do with coaching more broadly, but also with the show itself. Now, let's talk a little bit about what were my expectations and what was I hoping for as I started to build and create this podcast. The first thing that I knew was important for me was sort of an anti-goal, which is don't focus on the numbers. Now, don't get me wrong. I definitely look at the numbers and the analytics and the listeners and all that. But I know that if that was my sole focus, if I knew I was like, yeah, I got to make sure I reach 200 listeners, 500 listeners, 1,000 listeners, et cetera, because this was something I'm doing for the very first time, if I was really focused on that and didn't hit those numbers, then it would be easy to feel deflated and demotivated. And so I knew that based off of my very like an achievement oriented personality, like many people I work with, that was going to be a trap. And so what I wanted to replace that with was make sure that you're having fun. So this was sort of the distinction between a process versus outcome orientation. And I knew that for me, as long as I was having fun building this thing, putting it out there, then I could keep going. That would be a sustaining energy for me. But if I was really just focused on, did this bring me a new client? Did this, increase listenerhood and all that sort of stuff? Listenerhood, listenership. Anyways, you get what I'm saying. Then I knew that would be something that would cause me to quit pretty early. I think there's a statistic out there that says most startups never get past 10 episodes. And so one of my meta goals was like, don't die, don't quit. Got to make sure that I'm actually putting this out consistently. And I knew that having fun and learning across the journey was going to be that sustaining fuel for me. Now, the other thing I'll say is that I did have an agenda building this thing, referencing the origin story, which is I wanted the podcast to help build my business, right? I wanted to build awareness out there to help people know what I was up to and get a little bit of a sense of what it's like to work with a coach like me. So if you have any experience working with a coach, then you know that it's a highly individual process and it really comes down to the relationship and the chemistry that you have with another human being. I knew that I couldn't have conversations with every potential person that wanted to work with me. But if I could put out this sort of work out in public, then those who chose to spend the time to listen to this could also receive a little bit of that. I could transmit my vibe, my energy, my personality into that 1 hour conversation, and then they could then see for themselves, does this feel like a good fit for me? Do I want to actually reach out to Brian and talk about potentially working with him? The other thing I'll mention is that I think coaching as a tool and as a way of getting support to grow is just widely underexperienced and as a result misunderstood. And so there's a lot of people out there who use the word coaching to describe what they're doing, when in my book they're really kind of telling, advising, consulting, and it's not really the relationship that's designed to help someone gain that more self-awareness and support their evolution and their unfolding. And so part of my agenda with the podcast was to help demonstrate what that can really feel like, really help demystify what coaching is about, what it looks and sounds and feels like, so that even if someone doesn't decide to ever reach out to me about working with me in a coaching capacity, they at least have a good sense of what a coaching conversation can actually sound like and why they might want to explore having that in their own life, whether it's with me or any other person that can provide that. So next, I'm going to talk about what I've learned and what I've experienced over the last several months putting out, a dozen or so episodes. I think from a pure skill perspective, I've gained a lot, from, how do I make a good recording to how do I start to futz around with, Final Cut Pro and other podcast software apps to edit something that's actually listenable, and is engaging and is interesting. And for sure, there's so much more for me to learn. I think one thing that I noticed is that I don't do a lot in my post-production. That's not my skill set by background. And it does scratch my dilettante itch a little bit to like mess around with these different tools, whether it's Canva, Riverside, my different audio settings and video and all that sort of stuff to create something that's at least engaging to consume. But there's still so much more for me to learn, on that side. There's of course also stuff for me to learn on the marketing side, right? A huge part of this has been, how do I um, take certain moments from these sessions, these conversations, and put them out in short form and write about it in a way that's going to resonate, that's going to hook people and invite them to listen in. It's still very much a work in progress for me, and I think I'm slowly getting better at that. But again, it's just going to be continual education for me. The other thing that's worth mentioning is that I'm not doing this on my own. Lauren Tracy, who I referenced earlier, actually does help me with the podcast part-time in terms of just creative direction, feedback, marketing, copy, and that sort of thing. And so shout out to Lauren for her support throughout this journey as well. Now, in terms of unexpected challenges, things that surprised me along the way, I'll talk about a few. I think one is, this maybe shouldn't have been a surprise for me, but planning ahead is really, really important. So, I was referencing earlier that I'd run out of guests to coach and work with on the podcast. And that's because I sort of took for granted the idea or the fact that there might not be a whole long list of people ready to go on unless I put the work in. I sort of assumed, I guess, that as long as I release one episode within the next few weeks, I can find someone else to come on, get them prepped, and then create a new episode to release on a 2-week cycle, which is my aim with the podcast, putting things out every 2 weeks. And so, as someone who often shies away from planning and structure, this is one of my growth edges: is how do I make sure that I'm sitting down and being very thoughtful about who I really want to bring on? What are the topics that are going to really resonate, that are going to be useful for my clients to bring into a session like this? And how do I best prepare people to come on and build out a strong queue of guests and a queue of episodes to make sure that I've always got a few in the can, so that I'm not running into this like last minute issue, which is, admittedly something that I'm facing a lot of currently. The other thing I'll note is that it's a big ask to ask someone to come on to a podcast like this. It's not like any normal thing where I'm going to interview you, ask you a few questions, get your life story. It's really, hey, let's take something really sort of potentially charged, something that's sticky, something that is giving you some challenges, and unpack that in real time. And so for someone to agree to go do that is, I think, a courageous act. So I think there was a part of me that maybe underappreciated what I was asking of people, therefore kind of underestimated how many people would actually say, yes, let me come on. And so there's something for me to take away from that, which is really expect that a small percentage of the people I reach out to will actually agree to come on. And so therefore I need to really make sure my funnel is a lot wider when I'm reaching out to founders and leaders who might want to come on to this sort of thing. And then more specifically, in terms of what creates hesitation for folks, I think some of the most potent topics that can be processed in a coaching session have to do with people leadership, i.e. interpersonal dynamics. So often when people are in conflict, or when they're misunderstanding each other, or where they're finding it's very hard to collaborate with each other, like that's what creates so much of the psychological, emotional stress for leaders. And unfortunately, in a public forum like this, it's very hard to bring that in because you want to protect people's privacy naturally. I think the thing that I'm starting to play with is, how do I start to address that to create comfort, to create a container where people can bring that sort of thing? And I'll speak a little bit more in terms of how I'm thinking about that moving forward. Next, I want to talk a little bit about the feedback that I've received from listeners, and some of it actually has surprised me. So whenever I'm putting together an episode, I'm putting it out there, I have some internal sense of like, oh yeah, this is really going to hit, or this is going to be really popular. And a lot of times the opposite has been true, where something I'll put out there, internally I'm thinking, yeah, like I'm not sure if this was like the most exciting session to listen to. There was not necessarily some huge aha moment. And then I'll end up receiving feedback from people being like, yeah, listening to so-and-so's story was really, really impactful for me. Like I really benefited from it. And so I think that's helping me update my priors in terms of, often as a coach, I have some sense that the most important conversations are the ones where there's that like light bulb moment. But I think for the listeners, a lot of times just witnessing somebody actively process and sort of bare their soul, put their story out there in this authentic way helps people strongly relate and see themselves in that client's position. And that in of itself can be really beneficial. It can be very thought provoking. And so I have to make sure to check my own ego as a coach, right? Like sometimes I have this agenda of like, oh yeah, I'm going to really show how great I am as a coach because I really helped get this person to this enlightened spot. And really just remind myself that creating the space for someone to actively process and make greater self-contact with themselves is basically most of the game here. And I'll just continue to be surprised, I think, by what the audience responds to. The other thing I've heard from people in terms of audience feedback is, yeah, there have been cases where clients have come in or new clients have come in and said, I spent a couple hours listening to your episodes and I just came away thinking, yeah, like Brian really gets it. He really understands this journey and he's going to be a great support. And so that's a pleasant surprise for me because I wasn't expecting direct business to come early on, but it has happened a couple of times and I'm really grateful for that to have happened. And I think when it comes to like what the listeners are saying and how that's going to inform the podcast moving forward, there's probably going to be a little bit less of an emphasis on my end of like, yeah, what's going to be like the juiciest topic that we're going to really help people get unstuck on? Like that's of course important. But also this question of, well, how do I help my audience feel seen as much as possible? Meaning, how do I bring on clients who are going to have certain backgrounds and certain topics that I know that are going to really resonate with the target audience, which is startup CEOs and founders. And so, yes, kind of creating these insights and these aha moments and these shifts, super important. But really, can I just find the biggest pain points that are going to really resonate with the audience in general and just give some airtime to that, I think is going to be just an important sort of guiding principle for me in general. So now let's talk a little bit about how I'm thinking about the podcast moving forward. I'll knock out some of the obvious ones that I referenced earlier. One is just making sure I have like a long enough queue of guests and record episodes ahead of time so that I have that stuff in the can ready to go so that I'm not scrambling to make sure that I have a new episode every 2 weeks and I'm rushing each and every time. I think it's better for me. It's better for the audience. It's better for the people I work with and so on and so forth. So just kind of developing and being patient, I think is really important. And related to that is, can I plan ahead better on the different topics that I want to suggest people bring on into these sessions, and putting some thoughtfulness into what have I not explored with people yet? What are kind of some of the most painful things that are on founders' minds that might want to be exposed and explored on the podcast? Again, my inner non-planner, like the one that doesn't like to plan ahead, is like bristling at this, and part of me is just having to work with that and make sure that I'm leaning into that edge. The other thing I'll note is that I think given the fact that a lot of people have said, hey, I'd love to come on, but there's this thing that has to do with other people that I can't really put out in public, I am considering putting on an anonymous option, meaning I'll have someone on and check in with them ahead of time on what they want to talk about. And if it does relate to other people, then say, look, you can be completely obscured in the video. Your name will be changed. The names that you refer to will be changed. I'll even change your voice so that no one can really recognize who's speaking, and just see if that makes it more comfortable for people to bring those sort of topics on. I haven't actually brought that up to anyone yet, so we'll see if anyone takes me up on that. But it's something that I would feel personally excited about, not just because I think it's kind of a fun editing challenge, but also I want to be able to open up the format to this, I think, really, really big set of challenges that founders often face. And then finally, I'll say, I think the whole point of the podcast is to have coaching sessions, but I experimented with having just a standard interview style, like conversation style with Laura Shook Guzman a little while back. And I really enjoyed that. And I got good feedback from that as well. So I do think that I'm becoming more open to having episodes that are not pure coaching sessions. I think there's also room for me to do solo episodes, kind of like this one, but maybe exploring and opining on different topics that I'm seeing out there, or to bring on guests where I'm not necessarily coaching them, but we're talking about topics that are still really salient and relevant to the audience. And so, watch out for some more of that as well when the podcast resumes. And finally, I just want to say that if you're listening to this, I really want to invite you to give me feedback on the podcast. What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What do you wish were different? What do you want to see more of? Running a podcast can be a little bit challenging because you're not getting a lot of direct feedback from the people who are listening unless they kind of take the time to reach out to you. And so for those who have thank you very much. Like, I really appreciate that. And for those listening, just send me a note. Send me an email. My email is just brian@dashingleadership.com. You can find me on Twitter, subscribe to me on YouTube, leave a comment, or, just really reach out in any way that makes sense. And just give me a note. I would really love to hear from you and understand what's hitting, what's not, and how can I make this better for you? Or even if you just want to talk about how it impacts you, how it benefits you, I would love to hear that as well, of course. And then finally, let me just end on a note of gratitude. When I first started, I didn't expect anyone to really listen to this. And now I've had probably over 1,000 or more listens total, which to me is actually pretty good. I feel really good about that. And I just want to say thank you to all who have actually bothered to watch and listen. It's not lost on me that it's a big time commitment to go and listen to a full hour-long sort of episode on this topic. So thank you so much for spending the time and for believing in this sort of thing. And until next time, I hope you have a great summer, and I'll see you then.